her for actually taking, thank Anne for taking this project on board. I know we're all mad keen and interested to hear what she has to say. Everybody on here, I'm sure, knows Anne. Anne grew up in and was born into the dog world. Her dad used to have a big terrier man, and obviously her mum was a big person in the whole boxer breed. So Anne began to show dogs when she was only probably able to walk, I'd say, and has had a long and fantastic career in the dog world. So she's made up 31 only UK champions and over 100 Irish champions in boxers, Boston Terriers, poodles and Nazzles, and also 2 world winners, toy poodles, and top dog all breeds in Ireland on more than one occasion, several occasions indeed. So one of Anne's main highlights in her showing career was representing Ireland at the Eukanuba finals in Amsterdam with her toy poodle finishing in 3rd place, the only Irish person ever to do so, to date anyhow. And unfortunately then Anne decided that she'd retire from showing dogs 9 years ago. But thankfully she hasn't decided to hang up her coat yet from judging, thankfully. So Anne started her judging career when she was only 16 and awarded CCs in boxers when she was 25. The youngest person ever to do so, and became an FCI all breeds judge in 1984. And she has judged in more than 50 countries, including Australia Royal, the Crufts, obviously, were the World Show, European, Asia and Scandinavian Winner Show. And without the intervention of COVID, she would have been best in show in Crufts in 2021. But now she will do this in 2024. So we're all going to hire a bus and go to Crufts in 2024. This year coming, Anne has a couple of lovely appointments to look forward to. She's judging 4 days at Crufts next month, and then the World Show in Madrid and the Melbourne Royal and several other, appointments across the world. So all I can say now is, Anne, it's over to you. And thank you so much for doing this for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise. Sorry, just putting it on the full screen, hopefully. Okay. I take it everybody can see that now. So good evening to everybody, and thanks very much for joining us. I know there's a lot of competition for everybody's time. Now we can get out and about. So this is just, the aim is to give a general overview of judging, because I know people watching have different levels of where they're at in the dog world. But I hope everybody will find something that they have interest in it. So we'll start at the beginning. The basic question is, why do you actually want to judge? I think if you read these reasons, they're pretty much sound reasons to become a judge. And my mother, as Louisa said earlier, introduced the boxer breed to Ireland. And for her entire life, she really spent her time trying to improve the breed and promote the breed. And she received her Life Achievement Award at the British Boxer Club's Oscars after 50 years of contributing to the breed. So I wonder, if you're somebody starting out in the judging path, are you thinking you might be prepared to do the same? Sorry, I'm having a bit of a problem. Why is it not? Sorry, you'll have to bear with me for a minute. I have a technical issue for whatever reason, I'm not sure, but it won't change slides for me.
Is there a play button at the top end?
I might have to go off screen sharing and onto it here. Because it changed from the first slide, so I don't know why it's not changing from this one. Oh dear. We were doing well, weren't we?
We were, but not to panic. If you want to just come back and just maybe start it to roll again or something. Oh, there you are. You're changed, Anne. You're gone.
Oh yeah, maybe it'll work now. I think if you read these reasons, I think we'll all agree we've seen people like this, and it's not really a very good reason to start judging dogs. And I think, you know, nowadays, I think it seems almost like there's a ladder put down for judges, and people seem to think they have to climb it, but they actually don't. And if you haven't got the right reasons for doing it, you'd be better just staying at home or carrying on to show your dogs or whatever else you want to do. Because I don't think you're going to do the world of dogs too many favors. So what's important with the judge? Experience used to be a great thing because there were no judging letters, there were no judging programs, there were no seminars. So basically, if you were successful showing your dogs, somebody might think you'd have an eye for a dog and they'd give you a go at the judging. And it was rather sink or swim. If you did a good job, you'd get asked again. If you didn't, you wouldn't, and you'd probably get killed in the process anyway because you'd done such a bad job. But nowadays, there are an awful lot of different judging programs, which I think is good. The student judging system in Scandinavia is a wonderful idea because it gives the students a chance to get hands-on and also talk to mentors in the breed. But you know, at the end of the day, once you do start to judge, there's absolutely nothing like experience. Some of it will be learning by your mistakes. Some of it will be an appreciation that you did get it right. But there is actually nothing like experience in the long run. You know, when you start off, you think you know everything, but the longer the judge, the more you know you actually have an awful lot still to learn and always will have. Oh, for dear's sakes. It's jammed on me again. Sorry, folks.
If technology testing is at the moment, so just bear with us.
Sorry, but I don't know why it's doing that. Can you see it at the moment?
No, you're not sharing your screen at the moment.
Okay.
For anybody that's just joined us, we're just having problems sharing the screen, so just bear with us.
My apologies, because I don't know why I'm having problems sharing it. Well, I didn't have trouble sharing it. It was actually good.
Okay, we're back again, Anne. Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Right, we're back again here, hopefully. Nothing like technology, is there? Just when you're starting to get your brain into organization. You might wonder why I put up the icons for the American Kennel Club and the Canadian Kennel Club, as well as the FCI, Australia and New Zealand. And I have a very good reason for doing that, because once you've started to judge and you start judging abroad, don't think you can go everywhere in the world and have the same breed standard. You can't. Sad. I think the FCI rules of taking the breed standard from the country of origin is probably quite a good one. But I mean, there are quite significant anomalies. For instance, I remember the European show, winter show in Dublin. The judge put up an Italian greyhound with white on the back of its neck, acceptable in many countries, but not under FCI. People had traveled over from Italy to show Italian greyhounds under him. So you can imagine the Italians aren't exactly quiet when they're displeased. You practically need an armed guard out of the ring, so he did. Things like min pins. The FCI want free front extension. Hackney action is a fault. But in the UK, it's coordinated to permit true Hackney action. Same with breeds like Dobermans. The AKC allow for missing teeth and doesn't actually specify which ones, whereas if you had a Doberman under you in FCI countries with 4 missing teeth, I think you'd have a nervous breakdown. So it is always very important to not only read the standards of the country you're going to, but actually judge by them. Oh no, this is dreadful. Oh. So you might say, why do you need courage to be a judge? But you know, sometimes it's not that easy if you're in the middle of the ring and you know Joe Bloggs usually wins, or you know that that dog won the group at Crufts last week. It takes a lot of courage to go with your convictions if you don't think it's the best dog. So I think you have to develop a lot of self-confidence and basically make your own mistakes. If they are a mistake, and maybe they're not a mistake. So you do need to be brave sometimes, and you do need to have a thick skin. Integrity, I think we all know about that. I think the top cartoon tells it all, isn't it? It was the handler won best in show, not the dog. I'm afraid that we see that fairly regularly, unfortunately. With the bottom one, I think we see that more in countries where they have breed specialists. I think the UK is fairly well known for that, where breeder judges are showing under each other week in, week out. And you know, you put me down this week, so I'm sure not putting you up next week. But if you put me up this week, I'll put you up next week. So I'm afraid we do see that quite a lot. But you know, do you really want to judge like that? Or do you really want to win like that? Respect. All judges should have great respect for the exhibitors. If you think about it, they've spent a lot of money. They've driven many miles, maybe got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to show their dogs under you. For the groom breeds, they've spent hours and hours on end getting them ready for you. And you don't like it and you don't bother to even spend time with it. There's nothing worse than a judge who turns away before a dog has finished its individual. And then you hear the expression, the judge never even bothered to look at my dog. You know, it doesn't take that much to spend the same amount of time with each dog. And a smile costs you nothing. At least you can give a good experience to the exhibitor, whether they won or whether they didn't. We do actually carry quite a heavy responsibility for the development of the breed, because fashions are set by the winning dogs, and the winning dogs are generally the ones that are used at stud. So if the winning dogs have prevalent faults, then they pass that on. And before you know it, it's become the norm in a breed and it's accepted as being correct. So it is very, very important that we don't put up dogs that are untypical or have prevalent faults. And the other thing I think is very important is to bear in mind that a lot of people will start off, as we've heard on many of Auntie's programs, they don't start off in dogs with the best dogs. So if they come out and they get beaten and have a horrible expression, they're just going to give up and say, I'm not going to bother with that again. But if they come out and they get beaten and people are helpful and the judge is nice and encouraging to them, hopefully they will learn and they look at the better dogs and they will eventually get there. So it is quite a responsibility on many different ways that rests on our shoulders, that maybe it's something we don't think about too much. And then for all this money and time that the exhibitors spend on us, what do they get in return? I remember having a conversation with Farrella Summerfield many years ago when she was heavily involved in the judges' development programs in England. This was the early days of that. And she said the thing she found most depressing was the prospective judges who knew damn well which was the right dog and which was the best dog, but they didn't actually choose to use that knowledge. Whereas there were many people that tried their absolute best, but probably will never get it totally right. So I think we can forgive somebody that tries their best, but makes an error far better than the ones that know pretty well, which should go up and just don't choose to do it. I think the other thing is important to when you're judging is Judge the dogs as they are on the day in front of you. Don't think about what they looked like last week or how well they showed or how they didn't show. That doesn't matter. It's what they look like in front of you. Are they in coat? Are they moving? Are they got their tails up? You know, different things like that. And of course, you should spend the same time on each and every dog and be consistent in your approach. If you start at the head for one, start at the head for all of them. It also is a help if you've taken a bit of an interest in the breed and know what the breeders think is important. And of course, as always, courtesy and politeness costs us nothing. This is the standard FCI statement. Unfortunately, pedigree dogs are very much under scrutiny now for all the wrong reasons. So we have to be so careful as judges not to be seen to be encouraging any exaggerations or reward dogs that have a health problem or, for that matter, a temperament problem. But I think we all know that by now, unfortunately. The other thing is very important is that if we do see any handlers being rough with their dogs, we should immediately pull them up and throw them out of the ring. I mean, in some countries, I think it's nearly gone too far as handling, because you can't even use a slip chain on the dogs and no slip leash is allowed. But anyway, that's a fact in some countries. You can't cut their whiskers in some countries either. So ring procedures, this might sound pretty obvious. But, you know, there's nothing worse than arriving late in the ring. It's only happened to me once and I really never settled to the job the whole day, but it's good advice to arrive maybe 15 minutes, introduce yourself to the stewards, spend a couple of minutes talking to them. After all, they're giving up their day for you. Have a look around the ring, decide where you want the dogs to stand so that when they come in, the steward knows where to put them, and then send them around the ring. Before you start to examine them, have a quick look, but send them around the ring. I think this serves two purposes, because it helps the handler and the dog relax and settle in. And it also gives you the first opportunity to get an overall view of the class. And sometimes you see far more with them going around the ring than you do with them stacked. Then when they comes out to do their individual, just don't jump on top of the dog. Let the handler have time to stack it before you and relax it before you start going over it. And never be heavy-handed. There will be young dogs or inexperienced handlers, so again, give them the time. And again, everybody paid the same, so they all deserve the same attention, whether you like them or whether you don't. I think it's also important to be clear in your ring instructions so that everybody gets the same movement pattern. And it should always be decisive in your placings. Dither and get you nowhere. Now, you would think this is very simple, the breed-specific ways, but believe it or not, that staffy photograph on the table, as you can imagine, didn't go down too well with the staffy people. I think that's an understatement to say that. With most dogs, it's usual to approach from the front. Usually I would have a look at them from the side and walk around to the front. Some breeds like staffies, bull mastiffs will stood head on to you. It is important to talk to the people that breed the dogs to see how they go over them. Some breeds you need to feel for coat texture and also know which ones are table or ramp dogs. Some breeds like Japanese chins, Pekingese, you just rub your thumb along the front of the mouth, you don't open the mouth. Whereas others have to have 42 teeth. And it's important that you count those 42 teeth. So make sure you know which ones they are. And don't start counting the teeth on dogs that don't need to have it done. Again, don't overhandle smooth-coated dogs. One of my pet hates is when you see judges going over a dog and they look like they're kneading pastry or something like that. I don't know what they think they're doing. Or the other pet hate of mine is when they put their hand on the croup and bounce up and down as if it's a strength contest between them and the dog. Again, I don't actually know what it accomplishes. Sighthounds can be a little bit windy or spooky, whatever you want to call it. And you generally prefer to be approached from the side. Again, be very quiet, sometimes just to say a couple of words, even if it's just to ask the handler the age, just helps to settle them a little bit. Azafaks, I think, are a breed on their own. They're so graceful, but they will be very suspicious of anybody coming up to them. So give them time to assess if you're going to be a danger to them. Again, be quiet and don't be noisy. And I think sometimes you have to accept with an Azafak that as long as it isn't aggressive, you may not be able to go over it completely. It's very much part of the breed. And then we have the primitive breeds, in some ways quite similar to the sighthounds, but they have, while most breeds have actually been developed by human interference, they have developed naturally. So their natural instincts are to be wary and to run off if they get frightened. So again, be very gentle, no sudden noises or movements, and give them time to accept you before you try to put hands on. And then the final word of warning here is Caucasians, Tibetan Mastiffs, Japanese Dozes don't always love you. They were bred to be guard dogs. And in my experience, if the handler tells you not to touch them, you're just better to listen to them. It's in nobody's interest to get bitten. And the handler usually knows their own dogs. Now, I've actually highlighted these two breeds because I think they suffer quite badly with being badly examined. I think because they both, it involves opening both breeds' mouths to check the color of the tongue and the roof of the mouth. So that's not easy. And with the sharp eye, because they have that very heavy cushioning, it's quite hard to actually get the lip up to check the bite. I'm not going to read through all of this. You can read it yourself if you want. But I think the bottom line is there are two breeds that it is perfectly acceptable to ask the handler to open the mouth. And it's probably actually the kinder thing to do rather than have a battle with it. I actually watched a breed seminar on chows a couple of years ago, and she actually recommended that when you walked up to a chow, you tickle it under the chin. So I actually did try that when I was judging them, and believe it or not, it seemed to work quite well. They relaxed quite a lot with it. But definitely put your hand under the chin, not on the top of the head or over the eyes. They really don't like that at all. Puppies. They can be a delight. They can be a struggle. They can bring a smile to our face. But it's also very important to give them a good experience, because how they're treated at their first couple of shows can define them for the rest of their lives. Give them a fright and they might never recover from it. You also need to learn how different breeds, what to expect at the age they are, what they should be looking like, how the heads develop. And the other thing I think is very important is don't anticipate what it's going to look like in 6 months. Judge it as it is today. Even, I mean, I've done it myself. Sometimes you judge puppy classes and you put one up. But if somebody said to you, which one will you take home? You'd maybe take the second one home. But on the day, it just wasn't at that point of readiness to win the class. As you can see, what the difference in the two Scotties there. Believe it or not, these actually are photographs of judges examining dogs. A little bit different, I think you would agree. I also think it's important to understand what is typical temperament of a breed. For instance, the powder puff, the crested, they'll always be just a little bit wary of you, will spook easily. They're not going to wag their tail and jump all over you. The Mastiff will allow you, permit you to go over him, but he's not going to kind of react to you. They'll be reserved. The flat coat will love you to death. And a flat coat that isn't wagging its tail and looking as if it loves you to bits is not a typical temperament. And the Kerry Blue will say to you, I dare you to go over me. He's the tough man. And I think why it's important is if you saw a flat coat with a temperament like a powder puff, it's so untypical that, you know, it's just not part of the breed. So I think that it is important to actually learn what is typical of the breed and what's totally untypical of the breed. But then, as I say, it's not your job to be bitten. And if any dog does have a go at you, even if it doesn't manage to bite you, it's very important to disqualify it and report it, because the next judge might not be so lucky. And there we have these breed standards again. They give you a blueprint of the breed. And I've always found it quite useful to, when I'm reading the standards, I will actually take a highlighter pen and highlight what's different about the breed. You know, if they've normal construction, normal fronts and shoulder placement, I don't highlight that. But if they're saying, you know, scissor bite, level bite allowed, or it's allowed to turn its feet out, or the croup should be higher than the withers, things like that, I highlight it so that the night before the show or the morning of the show, I can just have a quick run through the breed standard, just to remind me of the different things that make it that breed. It's interesting, actually, the different breed standard, because the British ones are usually quite short and to the point. The Italian ones would put you to sleep. Sometimes you spend so long trying to figure out what they're trying to tell you that you lose the plot over it. Some have the faults and disqualifications. I do think it's quite helpful to know what's considered a serious fault and what's considered a minor fault in breeds. And disqualifications. In America, I think they quite often advise you that the one thing you must learn is their disqualifications. But again, as I said earlier, remember they are not all the same. And it is very important to know those differences when you get to the point that you're judging in different countries. Obviously, all FCI countries are the same, but there's a lot of other countries that aren't. I just threw this in as an example of the English breed standards being quite short. So that's the same breed. That's the head of the Maltese on the FCI, the Italian breed standard, and the head of the Maltese in the UK standard. As you can see, the UK one is one of few words. Now, type. That's a hard thing to define, isn't it? We're often asked about that type, oversizedness, which matters the most. But without type, is it the breed? And I've put these three quotations up from very famous people. And I think it kind of sums up really what type is. But I think that the one I love the most is Ann Rogers-Clark, a non-typical dog of any breed that is sound as usual. A typical dog of any breed that is sound is priceless. And I think that really sums it up. So it is important to ask the breeders what characterizes the breed, so that you know really what makes it the dog it is. Now, I just put these three breeds up for, I think, for the man in the street. He probably just thinks they're all hairy little fluffy dogs and they're all the same. But of course, from the breed people and judges' point of view, they are absolutely completely different. They have different mouths. The Lhasa is a reverse scissor, the Havanese is a scissor, the Shih Tzu undershot or level. The heads are different. The movement, the Shih Tzu should show the full pad, the Lhasa should definitely not. The tail set, there's so many things that are different about them. And that is what makes breed type. You should never look into a ring and say, God, is that the Lhasa or is that the Shih Tzu? It should be quite clear which breed it is. But I just threw this in it. But I think boxers suffer probably one of the worst for different types around the world. The top one is what you see quite a lot in Europe compared to the American, compared to the English type. And there I threw in a few of the American versus English types. I once actually did a comparison with the Irish breeds between the American and the Irish breed standards. and you know what way the breeds have developed in the various countries. And it's hard to believe there's actually not that much difference in the breed standards, but they have just evolved in different ways. Quality. We hear that expression, isn't it? What defines a high quality dog? I mean, we quite often read as top quality, high quality. I think you'd see from these photographs, these are all pretty good dogs. And these are the sort of dogs that if you've had a long day judging and you're out in the pouring rain and you're feeling a bit miserable and fed up with yourself, and then something like this quality walks into the ring and it just goes, look at me. And it just makes your day, absolutely makes your day. Of course, conditioning, how they're presented, everything helps. But then the dog itself has to have that wow factor, that you can't wait to get your hands on it, that you can't wait to get up close to have a closer look. And it just defies you to put it down. Again, I love this description, the difference between pottery and porcelain. I think that sums it up pretty well. And then we have the mouths. No matter the size, every dog, and I use the word supposed to have 42 teeth, but as we know, a lot of them don't. But the normal bite, the scissor, the reverse scissor, the undershot, or the pincer bite, some breeds can have scissor and pincer, or some of them even can have scissor, reverse scissor, and pincer. But no breed is allowed an overshot mouth, and it's a disqualification in many breeds. And a wry mouth can either be a disqualification or a serious fault. So dogs with wry mouth are not going to do very much winning. And then, of course, the dental formula. And in some breeds, like Rottweilers, Dobermans, it's very important that they do have all their teeth. But even in some of the breeds where the breed standard says they should have 42 teeth, like Tibetan Spaniels and Lhasa Apsos, when you're judging them, quite often you're just delighted to see a nice mouth. So you're not really going to be setting about counting the teeth. There are breeds where heads have become the be all and end all. And I think they are breeds that you will never win with a non-typical head. But then sometimes I think, particularly the collie breed, have suffered very badly because they have been so focused on the heads, they've forgotten about the rest of the dog. And it's not uncommon to have collies that look really nice standing, and when they move off, they plait in front or the cowhock behind. And I do always, you know, being a boxer person, I always do advise people that aren't breed people, don't try and judge breeds on their head, because you'll probably get it wrong. Judge them on the overall balance. But of course, it's important never to put up a non-typical head. But then, without a good expression, the head is spoiled. I mean, could you imagine a cocker with a terrier eye, or the Frenchie with the sighthound eye? It would just be totally wrong. So the head has to be taken in conjunction with the eye. And, you know, you see that lovely soft gun dog look, which most gun dogs should have. Maybe not always quite the same shape, but the gun dogs usually do have a lovely soft eye. And it's just such a kind eye, isn't it? And yet in the terrier's kind of looking at you, so to say, what are you looking at? So it does make a great difference. And then we have the ears. My God, they're complicated. I've fired out quite a few different versions of them. As you see from erect ears, one ear isn't quite the same as the other. Different sizes, different carriage, different, some are round, some are triangular. It can be tricky, so you do need to know what sort of ears they should have. And even in the terriers, I actually deliberately put in the Irish Terrier against the smooth fox terrier, because with all the ear set is the same, and they both called for small V-shaped ears. The Irish Terrier asked for them to be set well above the level of the skull, whereas the Smooth Fox Terrier says moderately above the level of the skull. And a Lakeland says neither too high nor too low in the head. So that's like, gives a clue, isn't it, really? You have to kind of learn to look at correct ears and just get an eye for it. I do think terriers can be very complicated. Then with the Westie, that you want small, neat ears, you don't want to be aware of their ears. And then, of course, the Staffy with the rose ears. And I'll just let you peruse those of yourself. I won't go through each and every one of them, but it gives you an idea, because there again, you can have a good head and expression, but if you have bad ears on some of them, it's going to spoil them completely. But it's not actually just the shape of the ears, it's actually the way they're set. For instance, in the Chihuahua, they should be flared. In a setter, they should be set well back on the head. So all these things make a difference. And it sort of completes the picture, even with the Sheltie and the Collie, that have basically the same type of ear. And the Collie, it says set not too close together on top of the skull, but not too far apart either. That's great, isn't it? And then the Sheltie is placed high and fairly close together. So sometimes you have to just use your imagination. So a nice reacher neck, nicely arched. It really gives a lovely outline to a dog, doesn't it? Particularly when they've got a nice crested neck. But you know, not every breed standard asks for this. Even those that want a good length of neck sometimes ask for a strong neck rather than a nicely long arched neck. And I've thrown in a few breeds here that definitely don't want a long neck. The Portuguese water dog, I was judging in Norway a few years ago and talking to one of the exhibitors afterwards. And she told me that it's not unusual to read a critique for a Portuguese water dog that says it needs more reach of neck. So there I go back to read your breed standards. Though I have to say, I have met judges who tell you to read the breed standards and then go away and forget about them for the rest of your life. I haven't actually practiced that philosophy, but it seems to work for them anyway. The Peak has a short, thick neck, and the Palm, as you can see, the tail comes right up to the back of its ears virtually. You don't see a neck at all. And could you imagine what a Peak or a Palm would look like with a big long neck on it? And then we come to length of back. I think short is pretty easy. I don't think we have any great discussion about that. The other thing, actually, just looking at the terrier, I will make the observation that when you're judging terriers, they do like terriers to have a good backside on them under the tail. In breeds like Sealyham, they really want a good shelf under that tail. So if you're ever judging terriers, do make sure they have a nice bum on them. So then I think we'll accept the short, we can manage, okay, no problem. So then you have the medium length of the Pembroke. What's medium? Again, you have to look at it in balance and get your eye into what becomes long, what's medium, or what's a bit too short. Some breed standards give us a proportion, you know, they'll say a ratio of 8:6 or 10:6 or something like that. But a lot of them just say things like slightly longer than high or medium. So again, you do really have to just get your eye into what's required. And then you have the long, deep body of the Basset. But the other thing I would just actually say about the breeds like the Basset, they should be well let down between the front legs. And you might actually ask, what does that mean? But it actually means that the body isn't just perched on top of the legs like a spare part. They should all be nicely integrated, so that there's no harsh lines. The other thing to remember, that the length of back always comes from the ribs, not from a long loin. The long loin usually means they have weak top lines, and not much drive behind. So these two diagrams kind of show it pretty well. And then we go to Toplines. If you were starting out to judge by this point, you'd have said I'd probably give up on it by this stage, wouldn't you? So we have the Chesapeake Bay there, that the top line, the hindquarters should be at least as high and preferably higher than the shoulders. The Old English has a gently rising top line. And of course, it's very important to check it is its top line, not the hairs. The presenters are pretty clever at backcombing that hair in the rump to make it look as if it has a rise. The American Cocker has a sloping top line. The Frenchie has a gently rising from the withers to over the loin, but that doesn't mean it has a humpback bridge type top line. The Afghan has prominent hinge bones and a sloping croup. The English Cocker, completely different from the American Cocker, has that gentle slope down to its tail. And then we have the PBGB with the level top line, and finally the Whippet with the graceful arch. All quite different, but absolutely essential to the breed. It's also important that they keep their top lines while on the move, because it's quite common to see American Cockers that have a lovely sloping top line when they're stacked, and they move off and they level out. The same with Whippets. And quite often too with English Cockers, you see the tail coming up, which usually means they've got a bit of a high tail set anyway. Now, when you look at the bone structure of the Doberman with no coat on it, that's relatively easy to see, isn't it? You probably can see most of that even without putting your hands on them. Usually when you go around, send them around the ring, you'll be able to spot pretty much all construction twills. But it's not quite so easy with the long-coated breeds, particularly with trim breeds like a poodle. It's the presenter's job to cover up with the trimming as much as they can, the faults. And it's not unusual to see super looking poodles, and when you put your hands on them, you find that they're no body, their elbows they've no depth of brisket, so their elbows have nothing to hang on to, and they're very loose in front. But if you think of a poodle as a lady coming out of the hairdresser, she doesn't want you to put her hand straight in the top of her head, does she? Or give it a little bit of a shake. It is absolutely not necessary to put your hand on top of a poodle top knot. It shows you nothing. All it does is annoy the handler. You can examine the head very easily. If you want, you can pull the top knot slightly back if they brought it out a bit over the eyes. And then you go to the back of the mane and bring your hands up to feel the shoulder blades down the front legs. And also important to check that it is reach of neck, not hair, because again, this can be quite deceptive. With the Tibetan Terriers, Lhasas, breeds like that, the hair can hide a lot of very poor front assemblies. And I can't tell you how many times I've been judging Tibetan Terriers and seen something that looks really, really nice, and you get your hands on it and you put a wheelbarrow through its front legs. So it is very important to and also to feel that the length. Tibetan Terriers are another breed that shouldn't have too much reach of neck, by the way, as well. But getting your hands on them is very important. It's also important to know where to put your hands so that you actually do feel the right points, not play patty paws all over it. Same as the teeth, no matter what the breed, they all have the same number of bones. I put this up actually because a common measuring point in the breed standards is from the point of shoulder to the point of back. And I think sometimes people get a bit confused as to where the point of shoulder is. Is it the withers? Or is it where it's marked here? Other good measuring points, but I think most people know that, is the wither to the brisket and the grind to the bottom of the brisket, and measuring legs. Another term often used, I mean, you see it a lot actually in breeds like Airedales, bearded collies. They say hock's well let down. So remember, the hock is a joint. So when they say well let down, they don't mean the pastern's well let down, they mean the hock well let down. Another expression that's used a lot is neck well set on. If you see from these diagrams with this is taken actually out of Robert Cole's book, a very, very good book if you haven't read it. If you see with the top diagrams, the neck flows beautifully in over the shoulders into the top line. There's no hard lines. Everything just kind of flows nicely, whereas in the bottom one, it breaks. They come down the neck and the top line breaks, and then it goes on sort of disjointed. For anybody that's a horseman out there, you would never want to ride a horse with flat withers because they're usually very bumpy to ride, and they don't have nice forward extension and smooth moving. They'll quite often be quite a hard pounding ride. So I threw in a few different types of front here to have a look at. The Doberman front parallel is a pretty common front to have, obviously with different widths between. If it's a bull mastiff, you want a much wider front, but you do still want it straight. Boxer, you still want it straight. Depending on the amount of rib cage the dog should have, but by and large, they should have straight front legs. On the other hand, the terrier front, the long-legged terriers, they also have parallel fronts, but it's much narrower because they don't have that rib cage to bring them around. So a terrier front on a Doberman or a boxer is far too narrow, but correct on the terriers. Then we have the Dachshund, and you can see the way the front wraps around, but remember the feet always point straight forward. The Bulldog, really very special. The front is tacked on as if it doesn't belong really, and the elbow should always be well away from the ribs. But that does not mean that the front legs are bowed out or the elbows are actually turning out. It just means the elbows are loose. Then a different type of bowed front is the crook front of the Basset Hound. Again, the front is rather wrapped around or bowed around the body and then comes in underneath, and they are allowed to turn their feet out. And again, with the Cardigan Corgi, they also turn their feet out, and the front is nicely curved around the rest of the body. And then the Westie, again, straight front, but much wider apart than the long-legged terriers. These are just some general front falls that we can see. And then there's feet. Again, quite a variety. And you know, feet do make a difference. Can you imagine, I mean, I have seen them, you know, boxer, nice round bone coming down the front legs, and then it has a flat foot. It just, unless it's in long grass, it's going to spoil the overall impression altogether. So for breeds that are supposed to have a cat foot, particularly smooth-coated breeds, it's important they do have them. But there are breeds that actually should have flat feet. Tibetan Terriers are one. And also Portuguese water dogs, but Portuguese water dogs should actually also have webbed feet. So you should pick them up just to check the webbing in them. The crested has the haired feet, and again, it looks perfectly normal with them. So there are different types of feet, but nobody wants a splayed feet. It's horrible. I actually think coated breeds get away with murder. Poodles are terrible for having bad feet. I think I quite like the American trim where they actually have to trim them up, the legs up a bit shorter off the feet. But in a lot of countries, the hair covers the feet, and you'd never get away with the feet on poodles that you do if you had them in smooth coated breeds. So again, always check. And then we have the very special Norwegian Loontide, a very special breed altogether, a puffin dog that was used to climbing the rocks, and apparently can do all sorts of gymnastics with its body, like pulling its head completely back and wrapping its legs around the back of its neck. Quite extraordinary, really. So then we are on to the hindquarters. I think the most common fault with hindquarters that we see now is the overangulation. You do see a few straight stifles, but of course there are breeds such as the chow that should have them. The middle one is the kind of average correct, where you can see the line goes straight down to the front of the toes. You can always note with the overangulated one too that they can't quite put their feet completely flat on the ground, that they're standing almost on their toes. And that's just another shot of the different hindquarters. And again, you can see with the overangulated that he's not standing square and that the hocks are lower to the ground. And then I think sometimes when you're judging, it's a good idea, and I like it with a lot of the FCI breed standards, that they actually give the history of the breed, so you kind of have an idea of what they were developed for. You know, why do we always span the border terrier? Why don't they want a big rib cage on it? Well, I mean, they were bred to follow horses. That's why they need a little bit of length of leg. And then they went down the foxholes, so they didn't want to get stuck there. So obviously a big body on them was not desired. The Dachshund was primarily used for badger hunting in its day. So it had to have very strong front legs and feet, and it used to rest its body on the keel to support itself while it dug out the badgers. And then there's the bulldog, hard to imagine, but they were used for bringing bulls down. So they had to hang on to the bull's nose while still breeding, hence why they need the nose well laid back. And I mean, lay back is a term we more often use as lay back of shoulder, but in bulldogs it's actually used to describe how well set back the nose is. And then they needed a very strong front so that they could use that to power the bull down or to pull the bull down. Hard to think now, isn't it? I think it's a long time since they had to do that. In actual fact, it was very dangerous for the dog as well. I think a lot of them got killed doing it. So obviously in a ring, we can't always judge whether a dog is capable of doing what it was bred to do. But there are things that are easy enough to see. You know, if it's got a bad temperament, if it's badly constructed, has it got well-sprung ribs, you know, general things that give us a clue. I mean, a gun dog must have a good rib cage to allow plenty of lung space and a waterproof coat. What good would a scent hound if it had short ears? The ears are designed to trap in any scent so that everything goes up to their nostrils. A working dog must have the strength to carry on working for many hours in rough conditions. And how would a heavy sighthound have the agility to twist and turn while pursuing its prey? So then we move on to movement. And you know, it doesn't matter what breed it is, they all have a specific way of moving. Different breed standards tell you what the desired gait is. But the bottom line is, no matter what the desired gait is, they should be able to do it without great effort. They should do it in a coordinated fashion, with correct carriage, correct tails. If they're struggling, then there's something wrong. They're not made right. the driving force comes from the rear end, but equally well, it's very important that the angulation in the front matches the angulation in the front. Otherwise, you run into problems because the front end can't get out of the way of the rear. I mean, you can see from, I mean, as far as movement, there's more than just being sound. There's head carriage, the top line, tail carriage, everything adds up to the overall picture of what a breed's supposed to look like. As you can see from these two photographs, the foot placement is pretty much perfect on them. They don't look as if they're having any trouble moving at all. And the leg coordination is excellent. This was just a comparison as what difference the slightly shorter upper arm makes. But if you notice, even with the shorter upper arm of the terrier, it still has a reasonable lay back of shoulder. So the difference it makes is it just shortens its front stride, but then the back end matches, so it's very well balanced. Whereas with the Dalmatian, it has a much longer upper arm, which allows it to have that extra forward movement. Upright shoulders, I think, have become a terrible problem in a lot of breeds. They make for short necks, no forechest, but because the dog will always carry its head up high, it can catch the eye. We also have seen incidences of judges thinking more and more is better. So you want a strong back end on the dog, and then suddenly it becomes so over-angulated that the back end is hanging out way behind it. And when it goes to move, if you've got the upright front, it's in serious bother. You see the upright front and the over-angulation, say in a breed like boxers now, when they're stacked, they look fantastic. There's wonderful top line and they look really, really good. But then, of course, when they move off, they're in trouble. And again, it's an awful lot of movement is all about balance. As you can see from this diagram, the foot placement's perfect. There's an ease of movement, nice carriage. The bone structure is matched both ends. Doesn't have to lift the legs too far off the ground, so it gives it a nice, easy movement. Whereas this poor chap can struggle a bit to move. He will have short steps because he's straight in shoulder, but then he hasn't got great angulation behind. So at least he can toddle along there without catching the back of his front legs, but it will give him a short stilted gait. But the over-angulated hindquarters do give serious problems. You can see here with the boxer that the rear leg has to come inside the front legs, or else go outside it to actually be able to move at all. Whereas with some breeds, they develop a hackney action because they have to lift the front feet out of the way of the back feet. They just have to adjust some way, but it makes it very hard work for them to move. I think this is a pretty shocking photograph of a dog that overreaches. Another thing that has been creeping in, and I think probably it goes hand in hand with what I said earlier about more and more being desired, leading to overangulation, such things. This word trad, tremendous reach and drive, it can be very eye-catching, but it's not necessarily correct. Even in breeds like a Doberman that wants a free and ground-covering movement, it doesn't mean that you really want them overreaching. You want it balanced, both ends, and you want good carriage. So it is something that even in poodles I've seen sometimes that they have far more reach and drive than they're supposed to have, because poodles are actually supposed to have a light step. I've been told actually by a Frenchman that there is actually no direct translation of the poodle expression, which has caused quite the expression for the poodle movement, which has caused quite a few different descriptions between dancing, stepping high, and all sorts of different things. But one thing you always have to remember about a poodle is it should be light on its feet. Absolutely. Any poodle that plods around the ring is not a poodle. Again, Labradors, they just ask them to cover adequate ground. The Pekingese, of course, is a breed on its own, that lovely stately roll that they have. And the Afghans must have that lovely high order. So they all have different, and I've only highlighted a few of the unusual ones here. But I've put up photos, and throughout the presentation, I have tried to put up photos of dogs, of nice dogs, rather than bad dogs, because I think looking at bad photographs is not a great way to go. And even with reading the breed standards, I think it's actually important that you either have a vision of what a good specimen of the breed looks like, or you've got photographs, or you've seen them somewhere, so that you actually get an image of what's good rather than what's bad. But if you look at these, you can see too, not all dogs have a high head carriage. In a lot of the pastoral breeds or group 1 breeds, as you can see from the border collie there, that's absolutely correct. An old English sheepdog will drop its head when it moves. Whereas the little pom would look awful if it did that. And you can see the Afghan moving with this style of high order, bulldog leading with a shoulder. And I actually love the photograph of the flat coat, because to me, not only is the movement and the foot placement perfect, but it depicts such a happy dog. It depicts the whole attitude of a flat coat retriever. And of course, there's the Basset, also very typical on the move. The other breed that fascinates me quite a lot is Azabaks, because they're in a way, they're very peculiarly made. They've got very long legs, fairly, I wouldn't go quite so far as to say straight both ends, but certainly not a great deal of angulation either end. They're ultra short and back, and you'd think it would make it difficult for them to move, and yet they are so graceful. They really are a beautiful sight to behold when you see a nice moving one. And I think it's, again, comes back to everything in balance, because everything works with each other. It can create this lovely picture of a really elegant, good moving dog. But then again, you've got to remember, you see, I always throw these, you've got to remember bits in here, that there are several breeds that only ask for moderate angulation, but it still doesn't mean, because of moderate angulation, that they can't move extremely well. And as you can see with the Akita, they're still looking for powerful ground covering movement. And I mean, a good moving Basenji is lovely to see too, but you do not want a huge amount of angulation. And of course, the Chow has a movement all distinct of itself, more like a pendulum moving. And then there are tails. I've highlighted 2 or 3 of the breeds that I think suffer quite badly for a high tail carriage. These are breeds where you should not have the tail stuck up in the air like the middle one. And I was actually judging staffies in Italy about 3 years ago, and there were 2-day shows, and I judged them the second day. And the guy that could best a breed, like, he was over the moon, and I thought, what's, you know, is this the first time he's ever won anything, or, you know, why is he so over the moon about it? And then he tagged me in a Facebook post the next day, and apparently the day before he'd been given an excellent, but he'd been refused the Cassib because he didn't carry his tail up high enough. And this dog had an absolutely perfect pump handle tail that was straight out of the breed standard. So sometimes you just also need to be aware of what's the same, what's correct in the breed. I mean, I find quite often too, when you judge Labradors, for instance, in South American countries, you get an awful lot of them when they move off, the tail comes up very high. And I'm not just talking slightly above the top line, I'm talking about a lot, and it completely spoils their overall impression. And of course, Shelties also shouldn't bring their tails up, and there's quite a lot of them that do. So always things to be aware of what is correct. And then we go to color and markings. They can give us an optical illusion. For instance, a boxer, say like marked like the one number 6 there, that will quite often give you, those long white front leg stockings will quite often give you an impression that the front is not good, but quite often it is actually a wrong impression. It's just because the white catches your eye. And when you look at all these silhouettes, are you seeing the same dog? Because it is the same dog. So it just gives you an impression of what way markings can affect how you look at dogs. And then I think in some breeds, and I'm sure there's more breeds than these, it is harder for some colors to win. In my own breed, poodles, there used to be a saying, not bad for an apricot, because the quality of apricots weren't great in those days, but now the quality of apricots is actually very, very good. But I think some judges still have it in their head, not bad for an apricot. I think Wheaten Scotties suffer a bit like that. The Tibetan Spaniels, a lot of people don't like the party colors. And I think black pugs, when you're looking into their faces, you have to be so careful, because their heads can look not as broad and muzzled or as nicely cushioned as the other colors do. So it is important to look closely at them and try and see past the color. I think probably in most breeds we all have certain color prejudice, even if we don't realize it. Now, I know this is going to give Mr. Brace, if he's listening, a heart attack when I say this. His favorite subject, throwing people out with switches and such things. But you know, it should be easy decision here. The FCI forbids it, so you should check them out. But then what happens when you're in countries, albeit FCI countries, but their presentation is much more American than FCI? Do you throw them all out? Or do you say to them beforehand, tell the steward to say, look, I don't want lacquer to be used, or I don't want a ribbon in the Shih Tzu's top knot? It's a personal decision. I think everybody has to make on their own, but it's not quite as simple as it seems, because there are a lot of FCI countries that in Asia as well, that actually are more akin to the American presentation than they are to the FCI presentations. I mean, in Shih Tzus, the FCI also says that no adornments, i.e. the little bow on the front of their top knob. And then we have different handling types to contend with. And I think we've all seen these, either as exhibitors or as judges. There's the first one there, that they come into the ring and they kind of come in with a swagger, and I usually win here. And they'll try and fix their eye on you and dare you not to put them up. But I find they're quite easily dealt with, because if you don't engage eye contact with them, they can't do it to you anyway. I have to say, I sometimes get a slightly naughty pleasure out of knocking them. I don't mean I knock them just because of that, but just if the dog isn't good enough, sometimes I think, well, not today, you're not going to win, mate. So the next one, I think, if you put up somebody like this that's kind of trying to ignore that they're showing the dog or that they could possibly win, and you say, yours please, madam, and they look at you and you go, yes, yours, you know, and they're going, what, me? Oh, are you sure? You know, do you really mean me? And you're thinking, my God, has this woman never won anything before in her life? So, you know, for any handlers that are watching it, it is good actually to maybe show a little bit of confidence rather than look too surprised that you won. All these other different types of handlers, I mean, the other one that's terribly irritating is the one that's permanently throwing things, shoving bait in the mouth or whatever. Particularly as you go to look at the teeth and they decide they're going to put a bit of bait in it at the same time. But it all adds to the color of life, doesn't it? I think the important thing to remember about handling is you are supposed to be promoting the dog, not yourself. A good handler will always make the most of the dog rather than be in your face. And of course, presentation, difficult to ignore, isn't it? If you get a dog well handled and well presented, it's going to take your eye. So you're going to look twice at it for sure. But you should also be careful that the dog is as good behind the facade as it looks on the surface. And also remember, presentation is only the window dressing. It all helps for the final picture. But if there's a better dog there, maybe not as well handled, you should still be able to find it. It is the dog under the coat that really matters. So then we go on to the grading system. Wow. Are there some differences in grades? You can go from best of breed and champion today and get a good tomorrow. They vary an awful lot. I mean, personally, with the falling entries and support for dogs, I actually wish we didn't have grading systems. I would like just to have a certificate quality that you, as they have in Scandinavian countries. Well, they obviously have the other grades as well. But I would just like to be able to either award the CAC or not, but just whoever's in the class gets first, second, and third rather than give them lower grades, because I think it's very discouraging for people starting off if they haven't got a good enough dog, if they're permanently getting lower grades. But anyway, that's my personal opinion, and it's not going to change the world, I'm afraid. But if you're judging in Scandinavia, they laugh at you if you don't use the grades. They expect you to use all of the grades, not just good, very good and excellent. They're pretty good at reading your critiques, and they generally know their own dogs. I do like the Scandinavian system where you have certificate quality, so you can then shortlist in your own mind the dogs that you want back to compete for the CAC, rather than having all the excellence in. But then it's a different mentality when you go to the Mediterranean countries and Ireland, where the people are positively insulted if they don't get an excellent. And I think certainly in countries like Ireland, where we don't write critiques, it's particularly difficult because people actually don't understand. Some judges are willing to explain, and some judges just don't want to discuss it. So that can cause quite a lot of tension around rings when that happens. Setting the grade or setting the bar for grading is always difficult. You're supposed to grade against the breed standard, but that's not always easy. And I had an experience years ago in Finland, and in the judges' talk the night before, they said only give an excellent to dogs that you want to give a certificate to. So I practiced that thinking in the younger classes, only giving out, I think, maybe 2 excellents in the juniors and intermediates. And then a class of about 20 champions came in, and they were no better than the juniors. So I ended up having to give lower grades to 3/4 of the champions class, which was not a very nice situation to find yourself in. But that is the problem. If you set the bar too high, then you're in trouble, because you have to carry that right through. And if you set it too low, then you have far too many dogs with high grades. I think it's always easy when you get really nice dogs like these photos here, easy that they're an excellent. Very bad dogs also easy. But I usually look, if they're reasonable size classes, I usually look around and initially at the class, and I'll take a notebook and I'll mark down what I think potentially are the grades I'm going to give the dogs. And sometimes that changes when you get your hands on it. And sometimes I've had a dog marked to get a very good, and I've dictated the critique, and I think, well, do you know, I really didn't say anything in that critique to justify not giving them an excellent. And it's really those mediocre dogs, they don't have an awful lot of faults, but they don't really have any great virtues either. And they're the difficult ones I find now and that's where certificate quality is so useful, because you can be a bit generous with the excellent, but it's definitely not champion quality, so you're not going to give it a certificate quality. But it's those middle of the road dogs that I do find quite difficult. Of course, it's also important to be consistent. You know, as I just told the story about Finland, you can't give out excellence to dogs that are not as good as the ones you give very good to earlier on. You have to be consistent. And critiques. A lot of countries, of course, you don't write critiques at all, or some, as in England, you write critiques on the first two. But obviously, well, not all FCI countries, in actual fact, just the European FCI countries that you write critiques. But they should be written that to explain, if you give high grades, low grades, why the dog was fourth, why it was first. You're not writing comparative critiques the way you do in England, but you should at least be saying some reasons why the dog didn't win the class or why he didn't get an excellent. And I mean, I have seen occasions where somebody's shown me critiques in my own breed where everything is absolutely wonderful, and then they give a very good. Equally well, it's useless writing a critique like a stylish dog, well worthy of being a champion, you know. So, you know, there are those sort of critiques as well that actually say nothing. I always like to try and start with a positive comment and finish with a positive comment. Sometimes you struggle for it, but you can always find something like nice temperament, nice color, nice something. But I think it's important to not write a totally negative critique. You have to kind of write something positive. And also, you know, remember the good points as well as the bad. It is an overall critique, not a total criticism of the dog. It's also important that you're breed specific in your descriptions. Different breeds have different terminology or different importance on features. And then, as I've used as an example here, and this is probably my training in England, where you certainly wouldn't have written critiques saying it had a head like a bucket. You had to be a bit more diplomatic. In England, it's usually preferable to say I preferred the head of the winner or something like that, rather than fault the one coming behind. So whilst on the continent, it is possible to write much more honest critiques, there are ways of saying it. You know, if you think it's a bit big, you can just say full size. You don't have to say it's flipping enormous. So different things or different phraseology actually say the same thing, but in a maybe nicer way. Now, I've listed these couple of critiques just to show you what I mean by a breed-specific critique, and I've highlighted some of the actual words that are very breed-specific. You know, an apple shade head without a fondle. I mean, that's clearly a Chihuahua he's talking about. Whereas in this one, the bulldog, you know, when it's talking about the strong lower lip and good turn up, the lower jaw projecting in front of the upper jaw, well opened nostrils. We know that's a bulldog that's been critiqued there. So that's what's important, to find some of those breed specific terminologies and points that really matter in a breed. So you'd be happy to hear I'm nearly finished. So just a few last words of advice. Definitely do your homework before you judge a breed. And when I say do your homework, I don't mean look on the internet to see who usually wins. I mean, study the breed, know what's special about it, what's important about it, so that you feel that you really do have an understanding of it. And then there's the clothes. Nobody looks good in a short skirt bending over a dog. It's quite revealing, and plunging necklines are not very desirable either. And as for the gentleman putting on shiny new shoes that cut the feet off you, it's not a good idea either. Equally well, jeans and a t-shirt are totally unacceptable as well. You ought, as a respect to the exhibitor, to turn yourself out in a decent fashion. But it is important to wear comfortable shoes, or clothes and shoes for that matter, but nothing too revealing. I've probably said this several times, but I do think it's very important that you treat everyone with politeness, courtesy. Even if you don't like their dogs, that doesn't excuse you being polite to people and spending the same amount of time. Sometimes I think it's actually the dogs that don't win that you should spend longer on, because the people that do win usually are delighted with you anyway. Be decisive. There should never be any doubt as to who is the judge. And you should be clear in, you know, when you pull dogs out, you should be absolutely clear who's first, who's second. And there's a few things that you shouldn't do. And believe it or not, it does happen. You know, don't plonk yourself down at the breed ring that you never sit at because you're going to be judging them next week or next month. People do notice this thing. So sometimes it can be useful if somebody knowledgeable in a breed is judging them in another country and you just happen to be free and can watch, that's okay. But certainly don't watch them in the same country you're going to judge them in. Or for that matter, steward in the ring that you're going to judge the breed at a later date. Again, when I said about courage earlier on, just because a dog won last week and the week before and is the top dog in the breed doesn't mean that you have to put him up. There might be a new dog coming up. This top dog started somewhere as an unknown. So there could be a young upstart coming up to knock him off his perch. So don't be afraid to go with your own instincts. Again, I think it's a mistake to follow what was put up last week, but who knows if the judge last week was any better in their decisions than you are. So again, stick with your own thought. This idea of knocking big winners just for the sake of it, it seems to be that some people think that's a great thing to do. It proves they weren't afraid to do it and this sort of thing. And I actually remember in Poodles winning the CC at Crufts, and he was a big winning dog, he had a lot of CCs. And as the judge handed me the CC, she said to me, I tried my hardest not to give it to him. And I went, well, why would you do that? You know, I just don't understand why judges actually set up. It's equally wrong to knock big winners just because you can. The other thing doesn't really be a good idea is to chat to exhibitors as you go along. You're better just to stick to asking the age or whatever you want to know, because people will construe their own ideas of what you're talking about, even if you're only just saying it's a nice day. I think this can happen. You know, you get the dogs in the ring and you send them around and you think, oh, well, the third dog down is going to be my winner. And then you start to nitpick a bit and you say, well, do you know, it could have a bit of a better eye, or maybe it's a wee bit loose in front. And you actually talk yourself out of doing the right thing. So I think sometimes just go with your own gut feeling. I don't think too much about it. In some countries, it is actually a rule. If it's a table dog, you cannot handle it on the ground. You have to put it back in on the table. And I think it's a very good rule. If you have a small dog on the ground and the judge kind of bends over to it, it can spook them. And even more so on a sunny day, if they bend over and, you know, the shadows looming over the dog. It's amazing what you see when you just tell the standard, you know, you move the dog up and down, you say to the handler, just let him stand there and see where the dog naturally puts its feet rather than where the handlers put its feet. It can tell you a lot. Equally well, sending them around the ring also tells you a lot more about the construction than you can quite often find out when you're handling them. Handlers have a great habit of fiddling with the things they know are wrong with their dogs. So you can often see the faulty fronts or the straight back ends when you see or top lines when you see the handler permanently trying to fix them. And another no for any breed, which is also quite a common thing that happens, is judges actually cover the eyes of the dog when they're looking at the mouth. And most dogs really don't like it. I think this is probably one of the most useful things to keep in your head. Always put dogs up because of their virtues, not down because of their faults. And I love this saying, to their virtues be ever kind, to their faults a little blind. It is such a good mantra to have. Now, I'm not talking about ignoring massive major faults. I'm talking about something small in an otherwise outstanding dog. I mean, even the greatest of dogs usually have some small imperfections, but they have such outstanding virtues. And it's very important that you learn to recognize that quality. A dog with, as I said over the grading, a dog that has not much wrong with it can be just a mediocre dog. And I've actually seen this, you know, we get a lot of German judges with boxers, and sometimes the German judges can be what I call nitpicking. If they don't like something in the dog, that's it, out. You know, I don't like the out, I don't like the front, out. And then they actually end up with dogs that are quite mediocre, but don't actually have very much wrong with them. So I think it's very important that you put up the dogs with the virtues rather than pick out the faults. And then it's not just the dogs are being judged, believe me. When you're in the center of that ring, there's going to be a lot of people having an opinion on what you're doing. So first of all, you have to accept it's not a popularity contest. You will never please everybody. The ones that win will think you're wonderful. The ones that got beaten think you're dreadful. And then occasionally you'll get somebody who didn't win who actually says they enjoyed your judging. Now that indeed is praise. Don't think you won't make any mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But the main thing is try not to repeat them, learn by them. I was once told that admitting you made mistakes was a sign of weakness, but I just don't see it like that. I think it's a sign of trying to do it better next time. And then there will always be critics sitting ringside or nowadays watching online. So you need a tough skin sometimes. Never think that the next time's going to be better. It's the here and now that matters. So each time you step into that ring, you do the very best you can, because there might never be a next time. And this might be the one you're remembered for. Andrew Brace actually wrote these words, but I thought they were hugely appropriate. For the political judges, It's very difficult. Once you start down that road, it's very hard to turn off it. And you know, the exhibitors soon learn who the political judges are, and their entries suffer accordingly. And then you are judging the dogs, not the owners, not the breeding, or not who's going to be judging in a week or 2 weeks' time. You know, sometimes, particularly in those big group rings, when you walk out into that middle of the ring, it can be a very lonely place. You can't phone a friend. You can't go 50-50. It's up to you. And there's a lot of people watching you. But there's nothing nicer when you look around the ring and you see a dog that you really love and you can't wait to touch it, to feel it. And sometimes you even want to send it around the ring again because it excites you so much to see that quality and that style. It's the most wonderful, wonderful feeling. But it can be. When you're starting off in the middle of that ring, sometimes it can be a bit intimidating. You know, just because there's a ladder and a programs now and a way of becoming a judge doesn't actually mean you have to climb that ladder. It doesn't mean you have to choose to judge. And, you know, it doesn't suit everybody. So, you know, don't do it if you don't enjoy it. So if you do choose to judge, for goodness sake, enjoy it. It's a great privilege to be asked. And that's it, folks. The end.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's not the end at all.
Now, if I can stop sharing my screen, that might be the next thing.
You can stop sharing your screen, yeah, no problem. There's a couple of questions for you, and when you get your breath there. First question is, do you think it's limiting to be passionate and ambitious to only want to judge your own breed and the breeds in that group?
No, not at all. In actual fact, I think it's quite commendable. You see, there is a bit of a thing nowadays. Everybody seems to want to be an all-rounder, but it's not always the greatest thing it's cracked up to be, because you tend to be quite often given breeds that other people aren't qualified to judge or things like that. And breeds you might be that interested in, which isn't actually fair on either you or the dogs. So I actually think if you really enjoy your own breed, first of all, I mean, there's nothing nicer than doing your own breed, but to stick with the group that you're interested in, absolutely, why not? Absolutely. There's no need that you have to progress. It's purely, you know, it's not a competition to see who can notch up the most breeds at all.
Okay, I'm just going to go through the questions because I'm kind of conscious of time. So, the best words of encouragement you've ever gotten?
Oh, that's a test. I think I might be speechless, which isn't easy to get. I actually don't know. It's not terrible.
You can have a think about that one. Something like
I'll have a second thought about that and then come back to you if I think of something.
Yeah, but do a rain check on that one.
Actually, I'll tell you a story. Actually, that yes, in actual fact, it probably is the best word of encouragement. It's just popped into my head. I was judging flat-coated retrievers in Sweden, you know, 4 days of shows, and I'd seen this black dog winning every day. I think he'd had reserve best in show the day before I judged them, and there was about 60 of them. And all through the show, there was an Israeli guy who was a breed specialist, and he'd been sitting ringside every day. So as I'm starting to judge, bearing in mind, I hadn't judged very many flatcoats at this stage, so I was quite nervous about judging them anyway. So he sits himself down in my direct line of vision as I was moving the dogs. So the champion dog class came in, and I sent them around. I thought, you know, I don't like the front of that dog. And I'm thinking, you don't really know this flipping breed. Why would you put it down? Do you know, everybody else has put it up. So I sent them around the ring again, had another think about it, and they eventually put the other dog up. I was feeling quite sick about it. Then when I was sitting at the group ring, the guy that judged the group said to me, he said, oh, that was a different flat coat. I wonder what happened to the other one. It was much better. So I'm sliding down the chair at this stage, you know. And then the Israeli guy came over to me and he started off and he said, I hope you don't mind me saying. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to get another slapping over this. And he said, that's the best flat coat judging there's been all week. That was the Malza dog that you put up that was the world winner and he'd won this, that and the other thing. Well, I think that is probably the most encouraging thing I ever heard in my life. And I'm not telling that story actually to say how great I am, but I can just tell you I felt about that size after I judged them. But when he said it and I was expecting him to annihilate me. So I think that actually gave me great encouragement to go with your gut feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. These questions vary from one extreme to another. Okay, so next question is from Alice. Outfit for handler, question mark. Oh, sorry, somebody just moved something. 1 second. I'll have to move it back up again. Okay. Is outdoor type clothing okay? Like North Face?
What, sorry?
No branding here. Like North Face is the brand. I'll be participating in the obedience and show ring first time. Is it better to wear something stylish?
I don't think so, really. I think you can be, well, it depends what you mean by stylish.
Yeah, well, yeah. Smart, I suppose.
Yeah, smart, I think is good. Stylish probably implies to me a little bit over the top. Yeah. So
not black tie.
Yes, exactly. So I think something smart. So do you look well dressed without going over the top? Yes.
Hi, Melanie asks, has Anne any tips for judging large classes? Does she split the classes, take notes, etc.?
Yeah, I think if you get very big classes, it's useful to split them, because it does happen if you're judging in America. Quite often you'll get a very big specials class. And well, there it's quite acceptable if you do them in batches. You can just write down the numbers of the dogs you want back. Again, in FCI countries where you're grading them, if you get very big classes, you can well, the grading will sort them out a little bit. The only thing I remember, I had a very disconcerting experience in Stockholm in Springers in the open class. I think there was 30 males or something like that. And as I went along, I was marking the dogs I really liked. So I had about 3 or 4 dogs I really liked. So I went round after I'd seen all the dogs. I couldn't find them. And I thought, I'm losing my mind here over it. But it had actually turned out that they'd already got 3 CICs, and because they hadn't done their working certificate, they eventually came back in for best of breed, but they couldn't compete for the CIC. So it was very disconcerting, and particularly in a big class, because you think you've kind of lost it. But no, definitely, I think it's bring them all in, first of all, so that you can check their numbers, and then divide the class, no problem at all, and judge one half. As I said, in some countries, it's acceptable that you actually shortlist, you know, say you half a dozen you want to see again, you take their numbers down. Others, you have to basically go over the first half of the class and then bring the second half in, and then bring them all in again to choose them. So it actually depends on where you're judging.
Yeah. This is a very long one. From Nicola. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, Anne. I have seen you at shows with student judges in your ring. In the UK, this isn't always something that is regularly seen, but is now more encouraged as part of the new judges system. Question, is it a process you have found works? I have particularly well, I think is what she says. Have you found it mentoring, have you found it as the mentoring judge? Have you found it that if it works particularly well as you being the mentoring judge, basically?
I think, I mean, the Scandinavia have it absolutely perfected. It's wonderful. There's different degrees. You can start off there where you discuss everything with the judge and you go over the dog. Then once you've got past that level, you can get to the point where you judge the dogs independently. You write the critiques, you place them, and then you put that beside at the end what the judge has done, and then you can kind of discuss that. I do think, I mean, getting back to what I said at the beginning, experience, it's a great way of getting experience because there's nothing like hands-on.
Yeah.
And you know, being able to talk about things that you're not quite sure of, have things explained. I've also found in Scandinavia the owners of the dogs are tremendously helpful. You know, when you finish the breed, you can quite often engage them in conversation with the student judge as well and expand even more of the knowledge of the breed. I did cause a bit of a sensation at Manchester 2 or 3 years ago when I had a student judge. But most people were actually quite supportive of it. But I think it's definitely the way to go. I'm fully supportive of it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, well, you can only but learn from somebody, can't you? Okay, this is from Monica, and she says FCI tends to take the English breed standards as they are, but many KC standards are very different from the FCI standards. While FCI follows the standard of the country of origin, the KC standards are very different from that. I think these are not helping the breed. For example, Keyshawn's head proportion or poodle sizes and colours. And what does Anne think of the big differences in the breed standard? Basically, that's
back to I've just found her message.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's such a shame we don't have the same breed standards around the world. I mean, quite often they're not even in the same breeds, never mind having the same breed standards. I completely sympathize with her about the Keyshawn head. I mean, I just think it's crackers having the Keyshawn, the Pomeranian, and the German Spitz all listed in the same breed standard. I think it's probably in a lot of breeds a good thing to use the country of origin because they are the country that developed them. But then sometimes that depends on how good the country of origin is in producing the breed standards. It's a difficult one to answer because some things, you know, why did the FCI turn Hackney action in min pins? Well, the FCI didn't, sorry, the country of origin did. Why did Hackney action suddenly become a fault in min pins, which had always been an intrinsic part of them? Why did showing the white of the eye and the Japanese chin suddenly become a fault, which had always been an intrinsic part of them? But obviously it's because the country of origin wanted to do it. I do think with the English breed standards, you can, there a lot of them are quite generic. So, you know, you could read them and you wouldn't really, if you just had the breed standard in front of you, you wouldn't necessarily know what breed it was referring to. And I think that's where it's very good. And I mean, I do it quite often. I would actually kind of look for illustrated breed standards or extended breed standards on the internet, which is, I mean, the internet is a great source of information for us now. It really is. But unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to, I mean, the poodle breed standard is dreadful. I mean, most poodle breeders don't agree with it at all, but we're kind of stuck with it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's many other breed standards that the breeders don't like terribly much.
Indeed. Do you think it's important to breed and show winning stock in order to be a better judge?
I think it helps, but it doesn't always follow that the top breeders make the best judges. And actually, quite often it doesn't follow at all. But I do think, and as I'd said previously, in the early days before there were judges seminars and, you know, different modules and progress processes to progress through, you were basically invited to judge because you were a successful exhibitor. Yeah. And then you kind of progressed from that. I think a lot of it too is if you continually show bad dogs, and I mean, I know people that have been showing for 30 years and yet can barely win the class. I think to a degree it has to say something about them. You know, do they not understand the breed? You know, why have they never got any better? So yes, I do think it is good if somebody has exhibited decent dogs for sure, but it's not always foolproof.
Yeah. Liesl said to say to you, Anne's critiques are always so educational, always very enjoyable to read. So go on. So what let's see now. I can't pronounce this girl's name. I'm sorry. To her. Why party color poodles aren't shown in Ireland? They're showing them in continental Europe. I presume she's asking, is it not a recognized category? I think that's what the lady is saying.
Yeah, well, it's quite controversial, the parti-coloured poodles, because they're not listed in the breed standard as being acceptable, but in countries like Germany, they are being shown, but they're quite often shown as a different breed actually now.
Yeah.
It's basically, but they are quite different in type as well. Whatever way they've developed the colors, and I actually don't know the genetics behind them. They tend to be slightly heavier in head, particularly the black and tan ones. They are very attractive. I feel probably eventually will be recognized, but from a judge's point of view, they are an unacceptable color. So if you're judging to the FCI standard, you basically can't put them up.
Yeah. Andrew asks, what is the best, not the Andrew, Andrew, what is the best advice you can give novice handlers? Yeah,
that's, I think probably take a tranquilizer before you go in, or a stiff glass of whiskey.
Maybe not. We won't endorse tranquilizing.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that one of my dislikes when I was showing the dogs, I hated people coming to talk to me about 5 or 10 minutes before I'm going into the ring. I always like to get the dog, ready to go in. Maybe just run it up and down a couple of times, get myself settled, get him settled, be on the same wavelength of the dog, and basically just get that relationship between you and the dog, that nothing else around you really matters. You're almost in a zone. Obviously, watching other people helps, and judges, that, as I said earlier too, I think judges can help with that an awful lot by making or helping handlers relax and not, being too tough on them. It's something that probably comes from experience as well. But I think if you try and ignore what's going on around you, try to get the dog, it depends what breed it is, but try and get it ready a little bit before you have to go into the class. Go off, not quite in the corner, run it up and down a couple of times, just really get a relationship going between you and the dog, so that when you go into the ring, you're as one.
Well, it'll settle your nerves anyway if you're concentrating on the dog, won't it?
It does,
you're thinking about other people looking at you, etc. Okay. This oh gosh, the questions are flying in, but I know we'd have to limit it. But is it correct to tell handling tips to an unexperienced handler who has a great dog, but its virtues can't really be seen because it can't be seen? Basically, if somebody hasn't a great dog and they're that's what they're trying to ask, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But provided you do it in a nice way, don't say, God, you're absolutely dreadful at this, why don't you do X, Y, and Z? But I think absolutely, if you see somebody and you see they've got a nice dog, and you can say to them in an encouraging way, look, if you held the lead this way, if you put the collar on that way, different things. A common thing that new handlers do is they get their hand in underneath in the brisket or at the loin, and they put it in underneath, and they pick it up like that and put a hump on its back. That's a kind of a very common fault that people do. Having the lead in the wrong place, all these things. No, I think absolutely, but do it in a kind way.
Yeah. Some questions about poodles. Question in relation to poodles, going back to breed standards, toy poodles are now getting far too big overall, and standards getting too small, all becoming these short-legged and short-backed. How do you judge them if they're becoming different from what they are usually, what they're meant to be, basically?
I think, to be honest, I prefer the non-FCI countries poodles where they only have 3 sizes. I think having 4 sizes isn't the best. But equally well in England, I'd say the majority of male toy poodles are well up to the measure. It's a problem with toys to try and keep them under the measure. And of course, in FCI countries, we don't measure them most of the time anyway, unless you decide you're going to measure them or they want to change sizes. It is very important that poodles have a good length of leg. You know, they should be very elegant. So short-legged poodles are not desirable. But it's a difficult thing, and you see, it's a bit of a contradiction in FCI because you know, you have the dwarf size, then you have the mediums, and the mediums are very big, but then they have a top size on the standard, so they're actually quite small. So if you kind of start getting the standards a bit smaller and the toys a bit bigger, you're actually getting the sizes much more into each other. I think probably the bottom line is the breeders and the judges, you know, need to, you know, sometimes again, I remember at one stage being asked to measure staffies because they thought they were getting too big as a judge. So I think probably as far as size goes, probably if the judges all started to measure them, they would probably deter them showing big size. But it's difficult with the question because I don't know whether they're talking from an FCI country or whether they're talking from a country that only has 3 sizes, you know.
Yeah.
So I can only answer.
It's one of those it's a whole topic on itself. Maybe we might do a seminar on poodles at some stage. We'll look into that maybe. Because there's a lot of questions about poodles. This other question made me smile from Sean. Exhibitor's point of view, is there an advantage to going first, middle, or last in the ring?
That's a good one. And I mean, I've seen all sides of that where people are nearly knocking themselves down to go first in the ring. And I mean, I have seen it said of judges that, oh, for goodness sake, if you're not stood first in the ring, you'll never win. I don't, certainly as a judge, it wouldn't affect me whether you stood first or last. I think actually whether you go first into the ring or further down the line, also, again, depending on the breed. I mean, years ago, I was shown quite a feisty boxer, so I always tried to go first in the line, because he would lose the head very easily, and it was easier to have him out front and keep him out of trouble. But equally, well, if you have a dog that's a little bit iffy in temperament, you're better to go on the end of the line. But I don't know if it really influences judging.
No, I don't. Another question is, do you think we should have exams on breeds before being allowed to judge these breeds?
Well, in a lot of countries, you do have exams on them. And in actual fact, it's going that way really for most countries. I think gone are the days where people just were invited to judge and didn't have to do anything. I think it's a good idea that it does prove you've studied the breed a bit. The only drawback to exams sometimes is you know, some people can be very good at exams. Some people can have a real eye for a dog, but absolutely useless with exams. So it's not foolproof, but it's definitely the way the world is going, that everything is
absolutely
down to exams. So I think that's basically as it is. I think it's very good that judges should have to have done attended a breed seminar.
Yeah,
that's kind of very useful.
Should stewarding be par for the course for all starting off in order to learn from experienced judges?
I do think it's very useful. I think it's good in various ways, because I think you can watch how judges control the ring, because that's an important part. You know, a judge should have full control of the ring at all times. Even things like, you know, you send them around the ring and you get a naughty handler who's good at running up another dog's rear end, things like that. So I think you get experience in several ways that way. And if you're stewarding to a knowledgeable judge, they're quite often very happy to talk to you about different breeds.
Have you ever been bitten?
Not in. She's a big wishing myself wrong here. No, not in the. I've been bitten, but only in the kennels. You know, in the boarding kennels. But in actual fact, I had a very lucky escape when I was judging in Chile. I was judging Commodores. Now there was only two, both champions, a dog and a bitch. And there was just something about this dog, because you couldn't see their eyes. So as I walked up to him, there was just something about him. And I spoke enough Spanish to say to her, "Is he okay?" or something like that. And she said, "No, he's very angry today." So oh, okay, up and down, back you go. So she brings the bitch in, and I asked, "Is he angry? Is she angry today too?" She said, "Yes." So I went up and down, bye bye. But no, I've been very fortunate. I have had a few dogs have a go, but I've been touch wood. God, I hope that doesn't put this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've never actually been bitten in the ring.
I think we'll have to kind of probably put a halt on the because we're coming up to 9:30. Just the last question: when, if ever, is it acceptable to ask the judge to explain their decision?
Well, you see, different judges have different viewpoints on that. I never mind anybody asking me, as long as they do it politely. Having said which, I think some of the worst exhibitors can be the French. They can get very upset when they don't win, and they will come up to you with, you know, quite angry with it. But then I find quite often, if you tell them what you thought of the dog, they just go away again, really, and that's it. But definitely, I think particularly in Ireland, where we don't write critiques, that the majority of judges, sadly not all, but you have to approach them in a nice way. There's no point going up with the sleeves rolled up and saying, "Why on earth didn't my dog win?" If you go up and say, "Look, you give my dog a very good, I just would like to know your opinion of it," you know, the majority of judges will answer you.
Fine, yeah. There's some more questions, but I think we'll have to kind of finish up. It's because it's 9:30 only. Well, all I can say is a huge thank you to you, Anne, for giving your time and all your knowledge. Well, some of your knowledge. You have a knowledge that we couldn't. We'd be here for several weeks to try and to get more of it. But all I can say, as I said, on behalf of everybody in Munster Ag, a huge thank you for giving up your time. And to all of you that are still tuned in, bear in mind that we are hoping to have our international and national shows on the 23rd and 24th of July. As soon as the judges are passed by the Irish Kennel Club and the show is passed by the Kennel Club, we'll be able to publish everything. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all in Corraheen and in July. So a major good night to everybody. And Anne, I think it's time for you to pour in a little glass yourself. So say well done.
Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in anyway.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.